Maturity is not defined by age, it's defined by how much responsibility you have. And I always say, if he's got to 40, no kids, no marriage under his belt, he's chosen that Peter Pan lifestyle. No 23-year-old is going to come along and wake him up. He's chosen to be that man. Are you sure you want to be with him? You're better off with a 30-year-old that's got more responsibility than a 45-year-old who hasn't. Because if you think a number defines maturity, you're lost. The reality is, it's the amount of responsibility, particularly responsibility and care for others. So if he's supporting family, if he's supporting an ex-wife, or he was married, or he had kids, it does something to men. It creates a level of responsibility and accountability that they can't get without that. So I do always tell women, don't be afraid of being with a man that's had kids, or a man that's been married. They're better than the ones that have had no baggage, because baggage is responsibility, which is then accountability for a man.
Do you think that the same is true in reverse?
No, unfortunately, it doesn't work the same way with women. Not always. It can sometimes, but it doesn't always work the same way, because women, when they have children, good women with healthy women actually prioritize the children first and foremost. And if she does, one of the priorities is becoming then super cautious of the man that she allows to enter into the man's world. And if she's a really good mother, she tends to keep a good co-parenting relationship with the ex. And a lot of men don't feel comfortable with that. But the true good woman, like the single mom that you should be looking for, is the one that's got a good relationship with her ex-husband. What men do is they prefer the woman that has no contact with the ex, and the kids have never seen the ex, and they think, oh, I'll go for that girl, at least the baby father's not around. That's a signal that she deprives or prevents children from connecting with their father. That's not a good thing. That's not a green flag. That's actually a red flag. So what men are doing is sometimes they're selecting women and thinking she's got children, but she doesn't let the kids see their dad, and they're not in his life, and he was a bum. But what does that tell you about her selection process, and what does that tell you about her ability to co-parent? It's an insight into what would happen if you two broke up. You won't exist for those children. That's not a healthy mother. A healthy mother is, he cheated on me, he was awful, he was a wreck, but the kids need their father. I drop him every Friday. That's the healthy mother. But men don't interpret single motherhood the way they should.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how fatherlessness impacts boys and girls' behavior and what they look for when they grow up and start dating?
Here's the problem women have when they grow up without a father figure, and they really feel it, is they'll always date a lot older men. So they'll be 17, 18 years old, and they're looking at the 30-year-old and the 35-year-old, and they're getting older and older, and there's a huge gap between them. Now, my experience of working with women that go for these age gap relationships is they are in survival mode without a father. They need that safety and comfort. And the conversations that we normally find really boring coming from our father about mortgage rates and saving your money, they sexualize those conversations. So when they hear it from an older man, they're like, oh, he's so responsible. They're not used to it. So they end up initially going for that older man and falling in love. But once they feel safe and they've got the money and they've got the safety, they then look for men around their own age. They end up, it's almost like having a safe, secure base. Once you've got an older father figure in your life, then you go on to see what you're sexually attracted to. But until you've got that secure base, you're in survival mode. You're looking for who can make you feel safe, not who can make you feel who you're attracted to. So they confuse, they blur the lines between attraction and safety, and they end up looking for it in an older man, but then cheating on him with a younger man.
You told me about this book you'd been reading to do with parental alienation. What's that?
Well, the thing is, I was looking into parental alienation only because I see it so much going on. But one of the things, punishments women use for a man that she feels has let her down, is depriving him of access to the children. Now, the problem I see happening is with the children of such mothers, especially the men of such mothers, they go on to have very, very abusive relationships. So men who grow up with single moms who blocked access, they end up with women who are very abusive. Either they're unfaithful, or they financially abuse them, or they're just they're physically abusive. They grow up with they end up selecting very abusive women. And from my observation and from what I'm reading, it looks like what happens is when you've been deprived of a father and you've only heard mum's side of the story, what happens is they put their mum on a pedestal. They think women are the innocent victims of harsh men. So what will happen is they're prey to women that need saving. They always gravitate towards women that they can save and help and nurture and say, oh yeah, that man was terrible, I've got you, I'm going to help you, I'm going to show you what life looks like, because I've been doing that to mum my whole life. The problem with those women is they are broken beyond you. You can't fix them. Most women can't be saved. They have something broken that they need to fix themselves. But the man that thinks he can save her is the one that's a little bit more delusional, and he gets his self-esteem from seeing her now love him. So unfortunately, he ends up going for very broken women that end up re-abusing him, and he ends up not having those boundaries that he needs with women. So they end up in very poor relationships when they've been raised by a mother that blocks access to father.
Starting a new relationship as a guy that has got some history. You know, earlier on you mentioned
kids.
If you're going to go for somebody that's a little bit older, it may be even in some regards a green flag that they've been through some relationships and got some baggage, you know, from that. But you also have the
jealousy,
inclusion of the previous partner and potentially the previous kid, resources, attention, so on and so forth. So that must be a difficult situation to navigate.
A lot of women suffer from that. They're really, really so jealous of the ex and the children and so on and so forth. And it is very difficult. I can imagine it would be horrible. But one thing that, again, if your husband has a good co-parenting relationship and is a good father, it's a foresight into how good of a partner he will be to you and your children. He prioritizes his children is really, really important. Now, a lot of women want a man to prioritize them over their children, but what kind of man is that? A man that prioritizes a woman over his children, what kind of man is that? It's not a man you're going to be attracted to in the future, especially when you have children with him, because that means the next woman in his life can take that priority. You need a man that prioritizes his children, and try and see it as something you admire in him rather than jealous of him, because it's a trait that's going to come in very handy when you have children with him, God willing. But that guy that is just all over the place and doesn't prioritize his kids, it's only handy in the short term.
There was a post on Instagram that I saw literally on the car on the way here. When you find out that she's unvaxxed, not a feminist, loves the Lord and aspires to be a wife, mother and homemaker, and it's Joe Rogan in the video going, oh, like it's a comedy thing. And the caption was, do such unicorns still exist? In the comments, people were dating. So girls were replying and saying, you know, you should come to church on a Sunday. We still exist out there, like blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But what I'm fascinated by is what is going on where unvaxxed, not a feminist, loves the Lord, aspires to be a wife, mother, and homemaker is like a counterculture finding a bar of gold hidden in the sand like treasure.
It is because we're so distracted by the women that aren't. The reality is that we're so bombarded with images of the women who are the opposite, who are the feminists, who are out there, who are not really of the Lord and don't really aspire to that. We see they're the loudest. So we see them on social media. They might be the ones that sexualize themselves a lot more. They might be the ones that put themselves out there. So what men are gravitating towards visually is going to be that filter of that kind of woman, the opposite. And the ones that they're ignoring visually tend to have those qualities. So here's the thing in life. Everything comes at a compromise. Now, if you want somebody that will stimulate you the most sexually, she's not going to be a virgin. She's not going to be on church on Wednesdays. She's just not going to be that girl. She might be somebody who's a little bit more conventional. If you want somebody who is going to be those, you might have to compromise. Now, what's happening is because we've become so shallow and we value so many junk values, such as so many superficial things like looks, when she's not beautiful, you don't even pay attention to her. So if she's not the most stunning girl, it doesn't matter what qualities have, she becomes invisible. A bit like with men. If they're not tall, a lot of women will ignore their existence, even if they've got all the other great traits. Similarly, if she's not absolutely sexy, is what men are now attracted to. They're looking for sexy more than ever before because it's normalized, it's Instagram, it's pornography. If she's not sexy, they don't even notice that woman. So that's why they think women like this are unicorns, but they are there. You just don't notice them because they don't have their boobs on your For You page.
25% of men over 42 do not have children, 5% more than women of the same age group. Almost 40% have experienced depression. 25% feel a deep anger. There is a lot of publicity, quite rightly, about women and childlessness, but men are very mute about this.
Unfortunately, who suffers more from when you don't have kids? What they find is women without kids and without marriage earn, I think, about 70% more than men that don't have marriage and kids, because marriage and kids gives men a purpose and meaning that they can't derive from anything else. It gives them the motivation to work harder. It gives them the motivation to do those hard jobs that pay more. It gives them a will to live. With women, we can still find connections with our friends and family and parents, and we can spread out our connections.
Marriage is a terrible deal for guys. She's going to take everything in the divorce, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of divorce, terrible. And it's not great for either party.
But one thing I would say is that the family laws are so horrible in certain countries, and I'm a big advocate for marriage, but mainly because I come from a spiritual and religious background. But from a non-religious background, I can see why it seems like a death sentence to get the law involved something to get married, because she can walk away with a lot, even if like she was up to blame. So I can understand where the fear comes from, but you almost have to take that risk in order to get the reward of a stable, responsible life.
I think the risk is increasing and the reward has stayed the same.
But the risk can be mitigated by a good selection. When you start trusting your decisions, you'll be less likely to be fearful of these consequences. But when you make poor decisions, of course, everything is a risk.
Why do you think there's this generalized culture of anti-children and family creation at the moment?
I wonder where that's stemming from. I do think it's a sad reality. I don't know where that's coming from. I just think the reality is there's so many alternatives to having kids now. You can travel, you can really become something. If you want to become famous, you can become famous. You can travel the world, you can make a lot of money, you can do all of these things. If you speak to people who have even scored goals in the World Cup, they'll still tell you that their best moment of their life is when their child was born. So I think it's a really negative thing to place, to kind of put on society. I think the reality is when you know that you're going to have kids, you have to take more responsibility of your life. You have to save more money, you have to look after your health. It gives you a will to live. Now, to remove that from you is a slow and steady self-sabotage. When you don't have any children for the rest of your life and you think you're never going to have them, essentially you could be a car wreck and no one's going to watch you. Whereas when you have children, it's an automatic therapy. You have to fix your traumas. You have to fix your self-sabotaging behaviors. So you're depriving yourself of reaching your full potential when you completely write that off.
All of my friends that have become fathers, they've stepped up in a way that I'm impressed by. Like they were hitters before and they're even bigger hitters now.
Yeah.
Which is why it surprises me that there is this generalized anti-children, anti-family creation culture.
And they even do it with men that are in in trouble with the law and stuff. Sometimes when they have children, it's the only way to get them off the streets, because it's the only thing that gives them that motivation that they can't find outside of it. But so if you are feeling that, maybe it's you need to sit down, have a kid.
Well, I understand what you mean as well, that there is this kind of mass individualism. I think that some of the most common reasons as to why people aren't getting into relationships at the moment, working on myself right now, just don't feel ready, sort of biding my time, so to speak.
Super childish though.
It's just it's a focus on the individual, and it's very isolationist, it's very atomized. It's all about the individual on their own. And don't get me wrong, if you spend your time, maybe you're working from home post-COVID, maybe your job doesn't actually require you to interact with that many other people, or maybe you're doing it all through Slack and through Zoom. You don't need to really leave the house that much anymore. You can DoorDash your food, you can stay on the couch and watch Netflix. We've become more isolated, and I think that trend almost causes us to justify more isolationism. And it's called extended adolescence or slow life strategy that Jean Twenge found. And this is just never really getting to the stage of growing up. Young people are getting their driver's licenses later. They're starting work later. They're moving out of the house later. Like the most common living arrangement for men under the age of 30 is still being at home with their parents.